Yo, welcome to this video. Today we'll be talking about the NBA draft. We'll be going into numbers and stats, but for now that's all I can say, so let's get into it. Every year, many NBA fans look forward to the NBA draft, a time where for many prospects, a lifelong dream comes to life. And as humans, one thing we all love is appreciation and recognition, which is why it is held at a high value by the prospects when they are selected at a high draft position. Being a number 1, 2, or 3 draft pick in the NBA draft not only instills a high level of confidence in a player, but oftentimes it's an opportunity for them to go into an organization and completely change it, or at least that's how it should be. As NBA fans, we also tend to show a high level of excitement for the draft picks, but not just any draft picks, but specifically those within the top 5 or top 10. My point is, as you go lower in the draft, excitement drops along with it, at least for me, and that is because we're expecting the next generational player who will not just have a solid career but who will dominate and perhaps change the league or how basketball is played to appear earlier in the draft. But such players are rare, and that's why they're actually called generational players, because there's one like them every after a long time. So in search of their next draft pick, GMs and coaches know that they're most likely not getting the next Jordan, Kobe, or LeBron, so they at least try to attain a draft pick who they can develop into a future superstar or an all-star. And it seems to me that more often than not, they make the same mistake, especially with the top 10 draft picks. So what is this mistake that I keep talking about? You would think that in the last 10 years, the majority of the top 10 picks have been the more successful players in the league, right? The all-stars, the MVPs, or the main faces of the league. But that's not completely true. Before we get to the real numbers of it, let's do something small. I did a random simulation to choose an NBA draft between 2009 and 2015, and I stopped in 2015 because I feel like by a player's 4th year, you can almost make a judgment of how they'll turn out, but not really in their 1st, 2nd, or 3rd year. So I got the year 2013, and 2013 is one of the worst drafts as we've seen in recent history. But as you can see, the top 10 picks have not performed as expected. Yet there were other good players drafted later, like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Steven Adams, or even Dennis Schroeder, honestly. But that's not the case for all drafts though. There are some good drafts, but this mistake is common, as I'm about to explain. This mistake is common and hard to see because you sort of judge players from the early years of their careers and later forget how high they were drafted. For example, a player like Andrew Wiggins, most NBA fans know that he was once the number 1 draft pick, right? And some of you guys may know that he started out as a bright young star with potential and slowly began to deteriorate, and even though he got some scrutiny for it, we kind of embraced it as fans, and now he's in his 5th year and it looks like we've sort of allowed him to be a solid NBA role player. And I'm not saying that's what I want for him, but that's how it looks like, which isn't to say that he can't turn it around. Another example is a player like Evan Turner. How many of you guys actually know that Evan Turner was a 2nd overall pick in the draft? In a draft that had other players like DeMarcus Cousins, Paul George, and Gordon Hayward. And that's not to knock on him. He's a solid player in the league, but not what you expected him to be coming out of college. And this is the same story for many draft picks, as you can see on the screen. 8 out of 10 of the last Rookie of the Year awards have gone to players who were top 10 draft picks. And this stat kind of shows how we use instant success to kind of validate the draft choices and to judge how these players will turn out. But it's not the whole picture. So to see the whole picture, I'm going to compile the stats to show how many top 5 or top 10 draft picks from the last 10 years have made the All-Star team, First Team All-NBA, or have won MVP and other awards like Defensive Player of the Year. I use the last 10 years because a 10-year player is one who is in their prime or just getting out of it, and notable players who were drafted 10 years ago are players like Blake Griffin, James Harden, Stephen Curry, Jrue Holiday, or DeMar DeRozan. So let's get to it. The first category is All-Stars. Again, I think it's too early to judge a player who is in their 1st, 2nd, or 3rd year, so for the sake of this stat of All-Stars, I will just count from 2009 to 2016. So, how many of the top 5 picks from the last 10 years have made the All-Star team? You've got to think about half, right? Well, out of 40 players, only 13 have made the All-Star game, and that's about 32.5%. and if you put that on a bar graph, it looks even uglier. Here you go. But top 5 is kind of a small sample size, right? So let's try top 10 picks from the last 10 years. That's a bigger sample size of about 80 players, so at least half of them have to have an All-Star appearance, right? Only 20 of the 80 players have been All-Stars, which makes it about 25% of top 10 picks between 2009 and 2016 who have All-Star appearances. So I know you're probably wondering who makes the All-Star team, but I'll get to that later. Another interesting major award which I found where top 10 picks are lacking is the Defensive Player of the Year award. In the last 10 years, only 3 winners of this award have been former top 10 draft picks. Those 3 are Joakim Noah, Dwight Howard, and Tyson Chandler. But another category where we can test the performance of top 10 draft picks in the last 10 years is the All-NBA team. But for this video, I'll focus on the first team All-NBA. In the last 10 years, there has been consistency of top 10 draft picks being a part of the first team All-NBA. And actually in those 10 years, only 5 players who weren't drafted in the top 10 appeared in the first team All-NBA, and 3 of them were drafted in the top 15. Those 3 are Kobe, Giannis, and Kawhi. So if you look at it from the stat sheet, 83% of players in the first team have been top 15 picks. But it gets kind of ugly if you see which players are becoming part of the first team. In the last 10 years, there have been 100 top 10 picks. But out of those 100, only 13 have been part of the first team All-NBA. And so, to answer the question of who becomes an All-Star or who makes the first team All-NBA, the answer is simply that there's a select few number of superstars who manage to have long stretches of dominance, which an average player simply cannot reach consistently. These are the same names you've been hearing for a minute now, like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and of course the man LeBron James. But you can always throw other names in the mix like James Harden, Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Carmelo, just to name a few. These are your guys who have quickly become household names in the league, who are always in the conversation for MVP each and every year. So what is my point in all of this? My point is that the draft spot at which a prospect is picked is usually far from the real story of how their career will turn out. Other reasons why top 10 picks are not always going to perform is because teams sometimes draft players based on what they need and not on whether the pick is the best player available. It is also hard to tell how a player is going to turn out at a young age unless they're absolutely special and rare like the LeBrons and the Shaqs. Of course, there's other factors like the player's work ethic, unforeseen circumstances like injuries or their life off the court, and there's also cases of diamonds in the rough or just busts. These are all things that determine how a player could turn out in the future. But that's it for the video. If you're still here, man, you're a real one. Click the like button, subscribe, comment down below, share or do all that good stuff. Peace, man.